thank you so much, Sue, for organizing this and putting this all together and making it possible. And it's really a treat to get to share this story with our community. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Ryan. Ryan Porush is a documentary filmmaker, as you know, and a journalist in Los Angeles. And this isn't his only project. He's produced, filmed, and edited documentaries and short films around the world, really focusing on telling dynamic, character-driven stories. His award-winning first film, 200%, was about a young man's journey to Israel to reunite with his forgotten father 15 years after a tragic accident. And it was screened at film festivals. And more recently, he's collaborated with Endeavor Films, with Vice, GQ, National Geographic. And like you heard, he's from Los Angeles, but he's received his bachelor's degree from UC Santa Barbara and went on to do his master's in documentary journalism at New York University. And it's also a treat to have with us David Elcott, Professor David Elcott, who, if you've watched the film, you know about him. I don't have a bio, Professor. I apologize. I didn't realize you'd be joining us till just a few moments ago, but it's really a treat to have both of you with us. Welcome, Ryan. Welcome, David.
Thank you so much for having us and for offering the film to your community. It's really special for us to be able to share it.
David, you're muted, so you have to click a thing. We'd love to have you.
While David's doing that, while Ryan's doing that, I will mention, please put your questions as you're going through in the chat. There are quite a few of us, it'll be hard, where there will be an opportunity for questions and discussion at the end. So please use the chat in your screen to do that.
Great, but welcome, David. We're glad to have you with us.
Thank you. Just so you may want to note that the chat is disabled.
Oh.
So nobody can use it.
Well, it was a good idea.
Are they able to send to the host, though, I believe, right?
Yeah, they can send them to me. Mine is
it actually says disabled. As somebody who obviously has been living
disabled entirely. There it goes. All right.
There you go. Now you got
Thank you.
Chat should be back up then.
I'm blessed to have all these techie
Great.
people here. Thank you.
All
Thanks,
right.
David.
Technology out of the way. It's a treat to have both Ryan and David with us. So maybe I'll send it just to the two of you. My first question was going to be, Ryan, how you got involved in the project, but really it was after a trip David took. So maybe the two of you together can talk about how this film came about.
Ryan and I have done this a bunch of times. We kind of don't tell the same story. So I don't know who wants to go first, you or me, because we tell a really different story about this. Wonderful story.
So I was in New York and doing some unrelated work for David and with David. We were collaborating on a project and started to become friends in a way. And he, around this time, this was 2015, I believe. And this is the story that David tells early in the film. He and his wife, Shira, who is a rabbi in White Plains, New York, they went to Ethiopia to witness what they thought was going to be what was essentially billed as the final Aliyah of the Ethiopian Jews. Israel was going to bring all the Jews. They were closing the synagogue, the school that they had sponsored, taking the Torah back to Israel. And David is in the synagogue and he turns to Demoz, who is one of the main characters in the film, and he says, "When are you going? When are you going to Israel?" And Demoz says, "I'm not on the list." And so from my perspective, David comes back from Ethiopia to New York and tells me about how it was like waking up out of a bad dream and realizing that there are 9,000 Ethiopians left behind. And myself, having been to Israel a few times at this point, went on Birthright. I was under the impression that every Jew in the world that wanted to be in Israel was in Israel. And so that combined with what I saw as an identity crisis in a way that this community was going through, being rejected by Israel and yet feeling, or through my research before going, being essentially others in Ethiopia, that seemed like a great story. And so here's the part where it might differ a bit, our versions, but David, as he does, like, sprang into action after his wife had already done a bunch of great work to keep the Torah in Ethiopia and keep the synagogue open in Gondar. He told me about starting an advocacy campaign where he was bringing Ethiopians to America to tell their story, under the impression that American Jews still had a role to play in this. And I convinced him that it would be a great documentary and that I needed to go to Ethiopia to film it, to start. And, you know, I might have said it'll be done in a couple months and it'll be a great 10-minute video. And here we are several years later, and it's certainly snowballed in different ways.
So, yeah, my story really is different. It's amazing, you know, it's like a Rashomon if you didn't see the Japanese movie. So it's definitely worth seeing. When we came back, as Ryan said, really the traumatic realization was that here was this community. You saw the pictures of them, you know, at services. They had Hebrew schools. Everyone would study Hebrew, Zionism. It was a very, very committed community. They had food pantry, they had a health center there. And all of this was going to be shut down. And the Torah was going to be taken back to, the one Torah for the community was going to be taken back. I mean, it was really just kind of remarkable. What was particularly painful was when we were there, the Jewish school was closed and they had all the children singing for the delegates. We weren't part of that, but there was a whole national, international delegation there to see the closing, and the school was closed, and you had these wonderful young Ethiopian kids singing in Hebrew, and it turned out not one of them was gonna go to Israel. So it was this really very painful, almost a charade. So Shira, who my wife, came back and raised the money to pay for the compound and to keep it open, and enough pressure. We put enough pressure to keep the Torah there. But we made the decision, you know, this idea of you know, kibbutz galuyot, the ingathering of the exiles, the deep belief that we have as committed Zionists of the return of our people, those who would want to go. And so the idea that this community wasn't going seemed so painful, but seemed that it would resonate with North American Jewry. I don't want to leave the Canadians out of this, because we also, although they didn't go to Canada, I went to Canada and speaking about this to all the various federations. It seemed inconceivable that the Jewish community wouldn't respond as they had done for other diaspora Jewish communities desperate to go to Israel. So what I needed was not just to bring the two, but to record it in some way that we could create a really a powerful advocacy 10-minute, you know, short, punchy movie that would grab the story. And that's where Ryan and I turned to Ryan to do this 10-minute short advocacy piece because he had done some wonderful work for me on other project. And we then spent the next year and a half by going, Ryan, where's the movie? What's going on? Oh, just working on it. But I have to go to Ethiopia, and we have to also go to Israel. And so what was meant to be a quick advocacy short piece ends up being this really extraordinary movie that those of you who've seen can appreciate. Those who've not yet seen it, I really hope that you do. The journey is a kind of multi-layered journey, and I think that's the power of it and the intimacy that Ryan was able to create. I can't stay on with you, but when Ryan writes and says, hey, I'm going to be doing this, it's like, how can I not at least show up, honor you, Rabbi Sachs, and honor the community that's actually investing in this. I do want to add, for those of you who have not yet seen it, you are welcome to turn your volume off for a moment, because it would be a spoiler for me to tell you. But the movie ends, for those who saw it, with Demoz and his family arriving in Israel. And this is the Israel we all dream about, dancing and singing, and the Israeli flag and the passion and the welcoming of Black Jews and the hugging and the caring at the very time when in the United States this has become so fraught. And here is Israel welcoming Demoz to Israel. But the movie ends then with Gezi, his best friend, his like soul brother, walking by himself in Gondar, abandoned, not going to Israel. So the good news is that Gezi is now also in Israel. We talked yesterday, Motzei Shabbat for him, or Shabbat for him, not quite Shabbat for me, because he's at the University of Haifa, and he is studying there. Demoz is studying for a master in public policy, a degree in public policy in Beersheba. These guys are trilingual, bright, sophisticated. It's everything that you would dream that Israel would want. And it's painful that they still have family and friends in Ethiopia. What we have decided to do, Israel has committed once again to bring the last remnant, and we're hopeful that they will follow through. What we have done is to create a fund, and that's a little bit of the pitch that I want to give for those interested, called Aliyah to college. Because these young men and women who are coming want to go to college. The Israeli government will pay tuition. But the reality is they have no place to live and no food to eat. Gezi, when he first went last year, when he started, he didn't have sheets, literally a sheet to lie on, because there's no way he can afford that. And even though they work, so that we've decided to raise money to help young Ethiopians be able to go to college. And we do that through NACOJ. Ryan can tell you more after I'm gone. But I do want to say that I think for me, as the child of a Holocaust survivor, the idea that my people would not take in these really beautiful, deeply passionate Jewish, Zionist, committed Ethiopian Jews was painful. At the very time that we were working to get them in, the Jewish Agency under Natan Sharansky offered any Spanish or Portuguese Catholic who could show that 500 years ago they were Jewish would be welcome to Israel. 500 years ago. And here were these young, passionate Zionist young Jews from Ethiopia who wanted to go. And as Gezi says in the movie, they're the only college students who can't go on birthright. They're forbidden to go on birthright. We allow the girlfriends of a guy whose grandfather was Jewish to go on birthright, but not these Ethiopians. So we have work to do. And that's really like I said, the movie stands on its own beautifully. If you haven't seen it, really is worth seeing it. It's very, very moving. And we hope that you'll help us out. We have a petition that we are still collecting signatures to make it clear that we do care about the community. And as I said, we're raising the funds to try to, when they get to Israel, to give them an opportunity for college. So that's kind of the story, and it goes on. The love is still there. I think Ryan, both of us, are deeply connected to Gezi and to Demoz, and through them, the Jewish community. So thank you all very, very much.
Thank you, David, for joining us. Even though it was brief, you put it beautifully. It's a wonderful film, and we encourage everyone to see it. And it's an incredible story of the two young men. But thank you for joining us. Ryan and I will keep the conversation going, but we appreciate it a lot.
No doubt.
I'm going to add my thanks too. That was wonderful. Thank you for facilitating that.
All right, Ryan. I want to back up a little bit. We jumped in kind of because we had a time crunch there. But let's go a little bit just backwards to what got a little bit about you before you get more into the film. How did you get into not just the film, but documentaries and all of this to begin with?
Yeah, so it was mentioned when you read my bio earlier, I went to undergrad. I got my undergraduate degree from UC Santa Barbara, where I was a writer and journalist. I was worked for the campus newspaper. I ended up serving as the sports editor, and I took a bunch of screenwriting classes. And so ultimately, I decided I wanted to go to journalism school, and found myself in really feel fortunate that I found myself at NYU in a documentary program. It was a 15-person program. More than half the people were international students, not from North America. And so I really grew there as a person and a storyteller, and learned the visual medium. I still feel like I have a writer's background, but I feel like a filmmaker more than a writer now, if that makes sense. And so it's really, I sort of mentioned it earlier, it was, I am Jewish, and certainly not that I am, I don't identify as super religious, but I think having been to Israel, being culturally invested in the Jewish people and in Israel, and understanding the idea of Israel, which is a very young country, and the foundation of Aliyah that it was built upon, were all precursors to my expanding what was going to be a 10-minute video into 4 or 5 years of my life. And at the beginning, it was really the sense of purgatory that this community was in. And more than that, these two individuals that become our main characters, is that, and I think David says it in the film, they're too Jewish for Ethiopia, but not Jewish enough for Israel, or too Black for Israel, is maybe the argument that member of Knesset Avraham Negusi makes. And he is a politician, whether or not he truly believes that. I think he's a politician, and did what, I don't know, we're getting ahead of ourselves now, but I guess I want to say in that vein, there are so many people, even including David and before David, that have worked on this issue tirelessly for decades and decades. And so I think, hopefully in a small way, this film is kind of a legacy of that. That although it's the story of this pair of best friends and their journey, it is also, I feel, tells an important story. What was once what is still should be a beacon of beauty and progressiveness for Israel, is that they brought Black Africans to Israel as citizens in 1984, 1991, and should be celebrated for that. It's really a beautiful moment in history, and it's unfortunate that we can't figure out how to prioritize finishing the job. Is the context I think it's important to put some of this in.
Well, I think that's what a great documentary does, is it teaches you about something that you didn't know. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how I was living under a rock or something, because I really had no idea about this community. I knew Israel brought groups of Ethiopian Jews in the past, huge numbers. And I didn't realize that there's this community there that's just sitting stagnant and suffering like this. And it was really incredible to watch and to see. Now, part of the goal, right, is to educate, But what was really the intention when you guys embarked on this journey of bringing them to America, to the United States, to go and speak to different people? Was there a sense that, you know, at the end of this trip, there would be an immediate solution to the problem, or it was just to get more word out? What was the real ultimate goal of that journey?
It's a really interesting question. Definitely different goals, overlapping, but different goals for myself and for David. If he were here and you were to ask him, I think my goal was to, of course, while, you know, I think it's obvious just by making the film that I believe in what the campaign was doing. I think my goal was to get as intimate as possible and capture this journey, this fish out of water story, this what grew into a relationship between a father figure and you know, the boys. I think the goal of the campaign was, you know, I think there was a bit of what turned out to be a false or a unattainable, difficult, extremely difficult at the very least goal of, you know, getting to the Jewish agency saying, okay, we'll do it. We'll finish the job. And I think there's a few reasons that the film gets into why it didn't quite come together like that. Kind of, you mentioned it though, at the very least, people were, as you saw in the film, so many people that you would hope and think would be informed on this issue. Just, it was, for whatever reason, had lost through the years. People assumed that the job had been finished. It was no longer in the media. Plenty of reasons. But meanwhile, this whole time, as you mentioned, this community in the film, it's 9,000 roughly, is still waiting. And what I think is so important to note is that, you know, 5, 10, 15 years, while continuously being essentially rejected by Israel, they still are devoutly Jewish and devoutly Zionist, as you see in the movie. That was, I couldn't have possibly expected such a vibrant Jewish community upon arriving in Ethiopia. I had definitely read that stuff, and then I had read the other stuff about how they are posing as Jews, you know, the two extremes really. But it's just the continually leading such Jewish lives in a country where it is difficult to do so while continuously, again, kind of being rejected by Israel, is really like such perseverance. And that's something that I so admire about the characters in the community.
I was actually hoping you might have some extra footage you could send me of what their secret is, because I wish I could get a group of Jews that interested in Zionism and learning Hebrew and Jewish life. Their synagogue was more packed than I've seen many a synagogue in North America. So I'm hoping that their rabbi has some tips or something. But when they first get to America, and you guys book these trips with these speaking engagements, different groups and different organizations, I'm curious, you mentioned before how, right, there's that spectrum of people that go, of course, these are Jews, they have to go to Israel, of course, versus people who don't believe that their heritage is real, that they're faking it, that, that it's just to get out of a bad situation. Were there organizations that didn't want to even meet with you guys, didn't want to even speak to them and hear the story, that just said, I don't want to be a part of this?
Again, I think David would have the specifics on that. There definitely, there were a couple lines along that energy that made it into the film. One is, I believe it was the Federation in Manhattan. He said I had to push to even allow this meeting to happen. And it's difficult because it's politics and it's agenda setting ultimately. And I think my personal opinion on part of this is that there's a stigma in Israel among certain people or communities that, you know, these Ethiopians are not ready. They're not ready to come and contribute to Israel. They're not ready to enter a more Western society. What are they, a drain on the economy? And, you know, when Ethiopians were airlifted dramatically right from the countryside in 1984 and 1991, many of them had never had an experience with electricity or running water. And although there is a you know, integration or assimilation program, like Israel, I think, would even say it could have done a better job. But the point is that this final community, they're on their phones talking with friends and relatives in Israel every day. They speak 3 languages. The younger ones, they keep kosher. They are so prepared to enter into Israel. One of the biggest shames is that Demoz and Gezi won't get to join the IDF. One of the dreams of their lives were to join the army in Israel, and they've aged out. Although they are in Israel now, they won't get that opportunity. So it's frustrating, I think, those sort of arguments seep their way when if this final community is so prepared and so ready and would really be such a beautiful opportunity for Israel to finish the job, even if for some sort of, I believe we might have talked about this on the phone. If they were thinking, if Israel as a government, I believe, were thinking in a certain way, this could be an unbelievable PR move or marketing move that, you know, even to get cynical, might distract people in the news from other things that are getting negative attention. But it's, I think, for what many things have happened that has shifted this issue so far down the agenda, where it's talked about in the film, there was a secret covert military airlift where thousands of Ethiopians walked to Sudan, and US and Israel counterintelligence working together, and unbelievable stuff. And now it seems like we can't do anything to just bring this final small group. And so that's where a lot of people remain frustrated.
Absolutely. Just from a PR perspective, you would think it'd be worth any cost. I'm curious actually about that a little bit. Have you yourself received any kind of like pushback on the film? Because when you watch it, it doesn't necessarily portray Israel in a good light. It's not one of Israel's greatest moments. And I'm wondering if anyone kind of gave you any kind of pushback of, could you have made something that didn't do that, right? Something that pushed the good sides of Israel. Could you have picked a story to air that made Israel look good, as opposed to this that sadly just isn't the case?
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's probably close to equal. People saying that you should have gone harder at Bibi and at Israel, and others questioning why are you, you know, why do you have to use this strategy to get your point across, I guess. Again, I think my view is that Israel ultimately should be celebrated for what it's done on this specific issue of Ethiopian Jewry, which makes it disappointing that we can't finish the job. I view it as my role as part of the diaspora personally to support Jews, and I don't think that always is supporting Israel, period. I think that we should hold Israel to the great standard, especially on immigration, that it created, that it set for itself as a country. And on this issue, I think we are falling short. And
I think that was part of the politics with some organizations that didn't really want to get involved, that they didn't want to get into an issue that didn't show Israel in the best light. Because I know in the North American Jewish community right now, it's a very tough situation. We are on the defensive kind of 24/7 when it comes to Israel, that put something out there, get involved in a cause that isn't full throttle Zionism, is difficult, I think, politically. Is that some of the pushback, you think?
I think it is difficult. Yeah, people don't want to, organizations don't want to go out on a limb. They don't want to get political. They define themselves as apolitical. I think it's, I think this issue couldn't be more Zionist, personally, is I think there's like a bit of a messaging or a reframing that could be happening. But a lot of American Jews, especially more progressive American North. I keep saying American. I mean North American. Apologies to our friends up north, because really, as Jay's, it's JFNA, and we met with federations all over America on the phone in Canada and meeting with the leadership, and some of these leaders that you're kind of referencing say they need to be in Israel. We support that, but Israel's not listening to us. We have no voice right now. We're trying to even get them to listen to us on other issues, and it is precarious, because we do have to defend Israel a lot of times, and and Jews. And yet, I think we also need to, from within, you could say, again, hold and push and aspire for Israel to be the standard that it set for itself, is my view.
It's very sad. Before, when you mentioned that, right, these two young men wanted to be in the IDF and they couldn't because they aged out, just because it took so long for them to make Aliyah. When on the opposite end, we see in the news, there's issues of, in the ultra-Orthodox community, people refusing that service, right? Refusing to participate in the defense of our homeland. And here you have a whole community that, right, you said their lifelong dream to get to serve this country that they always look towards. So it's very, very sad. I'm curious, right, David was in it as part of the story, but you're there, and I assume in every scene that we saw, you're there in the background somewhere.
I'm filming.
You're filming. You're the cameraman.
Filming almost all of it, yeah.
Okay, wow. Director, cameraman, everything.
Mostly sound too, yeah.
You got a boom in the other hand?
We go shotgun and then lob.
But along the journey, I imagine you got close to both of them. Mm-hmm. But how do you maintain that balance of being both behind the story, right, versus getting involved in it? How did that play out in any ways that was difficult?
For sure. Difficult, fun, complicated. It's especially in documentary and in verite documentary, and the way that I like to work. I'm after trust and intimacy with my characters, because when they feel comfortable to that degree, when they forget about the camera, when they can cry and give me just the realness, because it's not natural to have a camera in front of you for anyone. That's the best stuff. And so with or without the camera, I'm constantly trying to grow my relationship with my characters. I don't like to call them subjects because it feels less human in a way. And in a way, we are collaborating. I feel like I'm a collaborator with Demoz and Gezi and David. It's their story, and I'm navigating not just how to tell it, but their emotions and their actions. And ultimately, I was a guide at times. I was a teacher. I remember we went to get kosher pizza one time, and Demoz and Gezi had never used a soda machine. Taught him how to use a soda machine. Just one example of many small things that happen, and we grew to be close and are still close, and we communicate often. Yeah, myself with all three of them.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful, the relationships that came out of this. What about, are you in touch with anyone that's still in the community in Ethiopia? Do you know how they're doing right now with everything going on, just with COVID, with the political difficulties and the violence and everything, how they're holding up right now?
It's tough. I'm not personally in touch with anyone in Gondar. One in Addis Ababa, and Demoz and Gezi are, constantly in touch with friends, some family, not direct anymore, that are there. And the urgency of the pandemic of 2020 was a factor in the recent movement by Israel, by the government on this issue. Like David mentioned, there's a new minister of immigration, or I'm forgetting her exact title, but she is Ethiopian, and she was big in pushing Netanyahu to, again, commit to finishing the job. And it's very vague, but there is a plan to bring 2,000 is how it is starting. And that is partly because the state of the community is increasingly dire, really. I think because of coronavirus, but it was already, according to many, a humanitarian issue.
Wow. I'm curious, what was it like? I guess, sorry, first on that note, right? It is interesting for everyone that wants to say that Israel's racist and their decision not to bring them, right? And the opposite, and it's great that your story shows you have here a minister in the Knesset who's from this community, right? How quickly someone can rise up there. Now we have another government official, another minister that you're saying is from the Ethiopian Jewish community there, which really is a wonderful kind of on the other side of the story. Has the film been played in Israel? Is it being played in other places in the world, in other languages than English? Or is this really North America as the audience for this film?
I hope the audience is much larger. It definitely will be. It played in Israel unofficially, privately. We have played it for people who were involved or have worked on this issue in the past. But I'm not sure if it would have happened this year had things gone differently in the world, but we're definitely excited to bring the film to Israel and hopefully all over the world. But at some point in 2021, we'll have our official Israeli premiere, whatever that's going to look like.
I just want to remind everyone, if you have questions, you can send them. I have a couple more for Ryan for myself, but then we're going to start taking a few from the audience. So please message me any questions that you have for Ryan, questions about the film. I'm curious, Ryan, when you first got to the Ethiopian Jewish community, kind of what the reception was from people there. Were they excited? Were they optimistic? Were they wary? Because like you said, this isn't something that every few years somebody gets involved with, but nothing really seems to happen. How did they receive you guys coming in with the cameras and everything?
Yeah, I was very well received. I had Demoz and Gezi as my guides. I think there's been a lot of cameras in that synagogue over the years. Not all of them, but often parachute journalists that will come in and take some photos, and maybe these people that have been waiting for, some of them over a decade, might get their hopes up or tell their story or pose for a picture, and then nothing happens. And so I was very conscious of that going in and respectful. And I think that's part of why I love documentary, is that it is sustained and deep and hopefully like full. Like I hope when you watch this film, you have a full idea of the depth of this issue and story across several countries through many decades. You can't do that in any other medium. I mean, or you can in a long form story, but that'll take a long time as well. So yeah, they were not, they'd seen many cameras before. It was my impression.
Wow. And then when you guys got to the States, like you said, you were showing them things like a soda machine and all of that. Was there any point where they said to themselves, if Israel doesn't want us, why don't we come here? Like,
oh, it was an option. I mean, David often says this. David, come to America, guys. Like, you'll go to school here. We'll get you to Israel eventually. When we're leaving Ethiopia, we're going to Israel or nowhere else. They are truly so Zionist. And that was then off the table, really. They were not going to leave Ethiopia for America. It was not, I think, a bad faith, mostly bad faith. I can't speak for everyone, but a lot, they just want to get out of Ethiopia. In this case, that couldn't have been farther from the truth.
Wow, that's incredible to hear that they have the kind of the option and opportunity and still said no, they want to, it's home or Israel.
It was really, sorry to cut you off, Rabbi. It was really, we were getting nervous for the end of the trip too. I say we because I had grown close to them, and David and I had talked a few times. They're in White Plains and Beverly Hills and the Hamptons and Palm Beach, and not all super nice areas, but plenty of wealth, a whole new world for them. They had never been out of Ethiopia in their lives. And so that never changed the idea that we don't want to leave, but coming back as leaders with a new kind of knowledge, there was a lot of trepidation with them returning, and sort of the reverse culture shock that was going to happen.
Wow. It's amazing though, really, that after all of that, they wanted to go back there or to Israel. That it wasn't an option for them. It wasn't something they'd even consider. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about two young men. You mentioned before that they're both in their early 20s.
Yeah, at the time they're both in their mid 20s now. At the time of filming, I believe they were 24 and 22. I want to say, young men. Yeah. And
you can see the responsibility they felt. That one scene was, I think, for me, one of incredibly powerful when they're standing in front of their community, telling them that they're going to do this mission for them. They're going to go out. And the responsibility at that age, I can't say because my congregants are on here, but I was in a fraternity and stuff when I was 22, and I wasn't thinking about my mission for my people and any of that. And it's incredible to see that. Did they leave disheartened? It was hard to tell a little bit because I know it was not the result they expected, but they still seemed to also have so much hope. Like, what was your impression when at the end of all of this? Were they still hopeful? How did that feel when they left?
Tough. It's tough. Uncertain success. I mean, I think that they grew so much and ultimately recognized I don't want to say benefit, but this journey having changed them no matter what, forever. Meeting David, just go, the exposure, the experience. But as far as the real goal that they had to keep reminding themselves, there were weeks where they were actively trying not to have fun because, look, like we weren't chosen randomly from amongst our friends and peers to come to America on vacation. And so there were a lot of talks with like complicated conversations about that responsibility, really. And definitely it was an uncertain level of success, them returning home. A lot of people learned about their story and the issue, but they weren't jumping up and saying, we're going to fight for you. And that's what they wanted, understandably.
It's interesting you say that because I'm getting now lots of messages from people saying, what can we do? What can we do? That's the question everybody wants to know. David talked a little bit, but can you go a little bit more about the Aliyah to college and the different programs and opportunities and ways for people to get involved?
For sure. We have it on the website and in the process of updating that. The film has yet to be officially released. So we are working on having all of our goals aligned so that we can mobilize audiences, viewers such as yourself, when it does come out in the spring. We have partnered with NACOJ, which is North American Conference on Ethiopian Jewry, and they were working on this in 1984 and before. And we started the Aliyah to College Fund, which the first recipient, you could say, again, spoiler alert, apologies, it was Gazine, who you'd say after the film ends, makes it to Israel and is now in college. And so we thought that was a really beautiful way to, again, not that myself or the film is scared of getting political, but this is in a way like more of a humanitarian or like, let's support something that I think everyone can get behind, because, and part of the film, it's really, the idea of fundraising is so difficult in this conversation right now. It is still officially, although things have kind of changed, Israel's stated reason why they haven't come, although a lot of people don't think that's true, including members of Knesset, including David. And yet, for North American Jews, one of the main things we know how to do and want to do is to donate and to fundraise, right? And so this is, I think, a great way that people can put their efforts. We still do have a petition, and we want you to tell people about the film, especially when it's more widely available. This is going to be seen, if it hasn't already, by the people who can make these decisions and actually get it done. And so, yeah, those are our goals as far as what we want to ask people who this resonated with, and we appreciate that, wanting to get involved.
So the film isn't fully released yet, because I have a couple of questions people are interested in that of, they have friends and family they want to recommend it to, and they want to know how can they do that. And the answer is to
keep an eye out. You could put in your email on the website. It's www.thepassengersfilm.com. And the timeline might have got shaken up a little bit this year, but we are still screening at film festivals in anticipation of a release in roughly around March 2021. And before a public release, we're trying to partner with organizations, with synagogues such as yourself, to partner and to try to expose our hopeful advocates. Not everyone is, especially if it's just on iTunes, is going to watch the film and want to get involved. So try to do as many of these as possible. If you have friend organizations, other synagogues that you'd want to recommend an event like this to, this is kind of what we're doing for the next couple months. And then it'll be available at the very least to rent and buy, to stream is our plan.
Well, when it does come out again, we'd love to maybe do something else if we get the two young men to join us. That'd be wonderful to kind of get their perspective.
Most definitely. That would be really fun.
The timeline, if Israel made a commitment of in what time they're going to bring the rest of the community, because you mentioned before that they've committed to it. Have they said when it's going to happen?
So I'm just looking the first flight. So Israel agreed to bring 2,000 to start as slight movement on the issue again. That's hopefully just the beginning. The first flight is coming on December 3rd. And I'm not sure if that has been interrupted by COVID, and I'm not sure when they expect all 2,000 to come, but that's the latest I'm aware of right now, which is it's definitely not bad news. It's good news for sure. I think cautiously optimistic is kind of where a lot of people are on this. It's good that it's in the conversation and moving, but it's still far from completing the job, I guess. And it's tough because from the perspective of the community, they've heard this so many times before over many, many years. So
was your sense there though that people were still hopeful? Because it seemed to me, from watching at least, like they weren't the people that had given up. They seem convinced, like they're celebrating before the trip, and even on the return, once that first initial group was allowed to make Aliyah, that there's hope. They seem to just never ever give it up.
I think so, yeah.
Wow. Before we end, is there any other things that you want to add? Any topic that we've missed, or anything that you want to throw in, Ryan?
Wow, I usually do have stuff, but this was really great, Rabbi. I appreciate it. I think we kind of, covered most of it. I usually, it's sometimes these conversations, and I don't think this one did at all. It's like there's a lot of negative stuff about Israel that comes up because of the nature of this film, but I think we've adequately kind of contextualized it, which I think is so important. Us first and foremost wanting to support Israel, but also in upholding again what we think the country should be, we need to hold it to those standards. So that's kind of the energy of this film. And I appreciate everyone who watched and everyone still yet to watch. I'd love to be in touch, and anyone can reach out via the website, and in the future doing some sort of follow-up with the guys would be really special. I tried to actively celebrate them using this film as much as possible, because they're really the heroes of the story.
How did they get chosen to be the representatives?
It's kind of biblical how it happened, I would say. David sat down in the synagogue and turned to the person who he happened to sit next to, and he said, what's your name? When are you going to Israel? And that was Demoz, who was a leader in the community of some sort. And David decided he couldn't bring Demoz by himself. He needed a friend, someone to carry the burden, essentially. And that ended up being Gezi.
Wow. They, like they're incredible young men. That scene I really can't get out of my head, of them taking that burden in this hope of not just themselves, but thousands and thousands of people, their whole community. And I mean, really the film is for me an incredible lesson about hope, which is so needed and appropriate in these times. I know with Hanukkah coming up, I think about what the Maccabees would have felt like when they showed up at the temple, and there was 8 days it was going to take to make more oil, and they only had a little canister, enough for 1 day. And they needed a miracle. But most of us would find ourselves in a situation where you need a miracle, and you would just say, what's the point? A miracle is not going to happen for me, and throw your hands up and give up. And yet, for some reason, they lit 1 day's worth of oil, and that was what it took in order for that miracle to happen. I think, I would never get in my car to drive somewhere if I only had a quarter tank of gas and there wasn't going to be a gas station for a couple 100 kilometers. I would say it's not going to happen. A miracle is not going to happen to me. But that's what Demoz and Gezi did, is they went out and made a miracle for themselves and for their community. And it's really incredible that hope that they held on to, because that's what we all need right now. So Ryan, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for sharing this incredible story, not just with us, but with the world. It's really an incredible film. I loved it. My wife loved it. We watched it together. And anybody watching who hasn't watched it yet, you still have a few days left. I believe till Wednesday, Sue. Is that correct?
Wednesday. That's right.
So Wednesday. So make sure you watch it while you can. And tell your friends and family to keep an eye out for when it goes wide release or when it comes to their community, because not just every Jew, everyone should go see this film. It's a universal story, I think, beyond just the Israel, the Judaism, but this hope is something that the world needs more of. And thank you, Sue, so much for organizing this and putting this together.
Well, I want to say, first of all, thank you, Rabbi. That was an excellent interview. Ryan, I also want to compliment you. It's rare to see a documentary that's as heartwarming and involving and engaging in the relationships, while telling a story that's as important. So I want to thank you for that. And I guess I want everyone to know, I feel that that's one of the reasons we have Classy Lectures partnered with Beth Tikva, because quality things like this are important. And thank you guys very much. So appreciate it.
Thank you both. Thank you, Sue.
And it was really nice that David
Rabbi
came.
Sachs. Thank you, everyone, for watching, listening.
Pleasure, pleasure.
We're looking forward to your next film, to your next documentary.